Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is an incredible series, sure to give you chills, from the incredible mind of AgonyBlue, from over on Reddit, No Sleep. As ever though, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further, and why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled. When I was 6 years old, my sister disappeared during a hike on a family camping trip in Yosemite. Part 3. Let's get straight into that. When I awoke, I realized I was in the middle of a river of dead bodies. I gagged and spat, salt water flooded my lungs, and I fought to keep breathing. The bodies smashed into me, enormous waves pushing and pulling and sucking me underwater, and I was pulled under. Salt water flooded my lungs again, and I felt myself on the verge of convulsing. And suddenly, I felt the bodies part, and I clawed my way back to the surface. Salt water exploded from my nose like a fountain of blood, gushing from an open wound. I managed to grab a hold of a piece of timber that came rushing towards me. I pulled myself onto it. My fingernails popped and tore as I dug my fingers into the shredded bark, but at least now my head was above the water. Only then did I realize where I was. I was in the midst of a great flood, cutting a path through an enormous forest. It was like I was in water released from an enormous dam, as the flood rushed without thought or purpose. It was pure, unreleased chaos, and I could feel its anger tearing apart the forest. And by the light of an enormous full moon, which hung low, filling almost the entire night sky, I could see myself lifted above the forest and rushing past the tops of trees. Where was I rushing from? Keeping a firm grip on the piece of wood, I struggled to look behind me, as bodies and parts of bodies smashed into me. A wave caught me, and I spun, twisting me around. I wiped the salt water from my eyes. It was huge, more than 100 feet tall, maybe 200 feet tall. And it towered over the tops of the trees we were rushing past, and more than 100 feet wide. And it wasn't moving with the water. Even as the enormous wave smashed against it, the black, stalwart, sinewy body swayed from side to side, but it wasn't falling. It looked like it was standing up. My eardrums exploded in pain and my world exploded into fire. My eardrums, are they bleeding? It feels like they're bleeding. But I didn't dare move my hands, so I put my head down, gritted my teeth, and prayed that my eardrums could survive this onslaught. Then, suddenly, it stopped. My ears ringing, I looked up. The body was moving, growing. There were things extending from its sides. Long, slender legs like an octopus. Tentacles, hundreds of them. They grew and grew in all directions until they blotted out the moon, and everywhere. They were everywhere above me, and I was underneath their shadow. Then, with a horrifying cracking sound, the tentacles then started to drop. A vomit erupted from my mouth, coating the front of my grey sweatshirt. I felt seasick as the salt water and dead bodies were washed out by the sounds and smells. Availible Hospital. Arjun's heart monitor beeped as I grabbed a hold of his hospital bed to steady myself, but the waves threatened to pull me under, and I started to slide off my chair. Suddenly, I felt someone grab me. "Holy shit, Amy, are you okay?" My heart jumped uncomfortably in my chest. "Jack, hi." My back was cramped and sore from the uncomfortable hospital chair. I must have fallen asleep, waiting for Arjun to wake up after being wheeled out of surgery. "You got my text?" I checked the time. Almost 1 o'clock. It had been almost 4 hours since I basically crashed into the emergency lane until Alum had thrown Arjun on a gurney myself. "When did you get here?" "I just got here." He gestured to his EMT uniform. "I'm on lunch break." Jack was a pre-med at the nearby Columbia College and worked at Tulum Hospital part-time as an EMT. Arjun left a voicemail saying he'd gotten into a car accident, but then you texted to meet me here. I don't understand. Were you with him? Paula, leaving my house in the middle of the night, crashing at Arjun's, discovering that Arjun had been investigating my sister's disappearance. The photos of the missing girls, all 10 girls, missing. And then suddenly hearing something outside. Black SUVs rushing towards Arjun's house, making a break for it, and Arjun getting shot. Then the car windows shut out. Glass everywhere. Arjun leaving Jack a panicked voicemail, and then passing out. Me seeing all the blood and decided to take Arjun to hospital instead. But his questions just washed over me like a salt water from my dream. I was covered in vomit. God, this is so gross. I whimpered as I desperately searched for a rag or towel or anything I could use to clean myself. And Jack noticed. Amy Bell, here, let me help you. He helped me pull off the grey sweatshirt. His old nickname for me. I caught a glimpse of myself in a full-length mirror. I looked sick, sweaty, and my tight white t-shirt and the matching grey sweatpants looked dirty and wrinkled. My heart twisted. God, I looked terrible. Jesus, Amy, Jack said slowly. Why are there shards of glass in your face? He reached out to touch them. And all down your arm, too. He stood up and started bustling around. And from the cabinets he pulled out a gauze, rubbing alcohol, and tweezers. Let me get that glass out. Oh, come on, dude, stop. I tried to push him away. I could feel tears in my eyes, and I was trying not to get overwhelmed. But he was too close to me, and I wasn't sure what to do or what to say. The last 3 years of unanswered text messages and unanswered feelings hung like curtains between us. It didn't help that he looked the exact same too. Same dark eyes, same dark skin. His dreads were a little longer. I noticed, but that was it. He was wearing new glasses too. I wonder if the new girlfriend got those glasses for him. He grabbed my hands, interrupting my thoughts. You get infected if the glass doesn't come out. Seriously, Jack Jenkins? Threatening me with infection? Could you just... He held up his hands. How about this? For every glass shard I pull out your face, I get to ask a question. After all, I did get a frantic phone call from Arjun this morning who insisted I meet him. Then I got an equally frantic text from you, saying that Arjun was in surgery. Oh, he does have a point. Fine. I relented. Thank you, he said, snippily. He then dug a little too happily into my face, and I winced. Okay, there. First question. Why did Arjun want to meet at my house and not the hospital? And I sighed. I'm not sure. Maybe he doesn't have health insurance? I sighed again. I passed out before I could get an answer from him. And Jack nodded, and then leaned in again. God, he even smelled the same. There. Okay. Question 2. Why did you bring him to the hospital instead? I sighed. Because Arjun's got that fucking heart condition. He was dying. He was being an idiot. He'd just gotten shot and... Shit. The truth slipped out. Crap, shit. I pressed the heels of my hands into my forehead. There was so much happening, I was just so tired. And Jack stopped short too. Wait, shot? Like with a gun? I thought you said in the text that it was a car accident. It was kind of that too. And Jack interrupted me. Amy, he grabbed the sides of my face. My skin burned where he touched me. Be honest with me. Is this a drug thing? A drug thing? Huh, of course, he thought it was that. That's all I ever been to him. Every pill, every mistake, the 5 years I spent dating him reared up like a snake, threatening to bite. Those 3 little words tore me apart, tore my chest apart like I was nothing. Because I was nothing, especially to Jack Jenkins. No, Jack, it wasn't a drug thing. What is it? His grip tightened. It's been 3 years, Amy. 3 years since I heard from you, since I've seen you, since any of us besides Arjun have seen you. 3 years since... 3 years since one of the worst days of my life. We were at a picnic organized by our parents. We were all there, including all of our parents. Everyone, except for my mum. Mine and Jack's 5th year anniversary was coming up. We felt it was a big accomplishment at the age of 18. And part of that, though, was the condition that I quit abusing Xanax and alcohol. And Jack thought that I was quitting. He thought that because I told him I was, and honest to God I tried, I really did. But every time I did quit, and I flushed those pills down the drain, that's when the feelings started to happen again, and the only way to stop them was to make myself numb. Jack caught me with a pill bottle and ended it right there and then. "Hey, Amy." Jack gently tapped the palms of my hands. "Hey, you went somewhere." I forced myself back into the present. The dreams dissipated, leaving me in my disappointing reality. His words laid me like concrete, pushing my feelings down even further. I felt numb and cold. What? His eyes looked sad, resigned. I asked, "Why did you come back, Amy?" "Because fuck you, Jack." "Because Paula's back, Jack," I said simply. "And you need to contact Louise for me, because I'm pretty sure she knows why." The look on his face, it was priceless, but I suddenly felt sick. The words had felt like bile and acid. They burned, leaving my mouth, and I felt like they were slowly eating me alive. I stood up, feeling a little wobbly in the knees. "Here," I handed him my phone. "There's a video I need you to see." And Jack took it. "Cold." "All zeros." And Jack punched it in. The phone lit up, and he looked at me. His lip curled for a brief moment. Tight security. But I ignored him. "I'm going to get some food. Please keep an eye on Arjun until I get back. The second he wakes up, we need to leave." My stomach grumbled as I wandered down the hall from Arjun's room. I was looking for the vending machines. They put him in a recovery room, upstairs in the northeast wing. And Tulalum Hospital was in the shape of a perfect square, with hallways running north-south and east-west. At the entrance there's a help desk, which welcomes you in, surrounded by a ring of offices and blood-testing lab facilities. The trauma centre, where Arjun had been wheeled into, the urgent care, are also on the first floor, and upstairs on the second, third and fourth floors you'd find the more specialist units, such as cardiology or coronary care unit, intensive care unit, neurology, cancer centre, and obstetrics and gynecology. There, found them. I wandered over to the familiar blue light, like a moth to the flame. I rested my forehead against the cool glass as the events from this morning washed over me. Arjun got shot, I thought, because of me. My throat felt thick as I struggled to swallow. I forced myself to fight back tears. Arjun could have died as that man in a white suit shot into the goddamn car. The sensation of the exploding glass gripped me again and again. Another person dead because of me. My breathing got short, and the edges of my vision started to go white. "No, calm down." I balled my hands into fists and forced myself to breathe deep. "You cannot afford a panic attack. Not now." And with everything that was swimming around in my brain, there were only two things I knew for certain at this moment. One, I hadn't eaten since yesterday, and that stale bag of Cheetos in row E4 was looking delicious. And two, me and Arjun needed to get the fuck out of this hospital. Although I wasn't sure where we'd go. Maybe my apartment. We could hide out there until we figured out what to do. I wiped the tears from my eyes and punched in the 4 quarters. The Cheetos fell to the drawer, and I bent down to pick them up. In the reflection of the glass, I suddenly recognized someone very familiar, starting to walk up the hallway behind me. Hide. I need somewhere to hide. Desperate, I scanned the hallway. There were a series of offices, with doors emblazoned, with names that I assumed were doctors and specialists. Then, supply closet. Without a second to lose, I opened the door and ducked inside. My heart pounding, I listened as my mother walked into the office, directly next to me. "Jay?" My mother's shrill voice slurred. "Do you think it's wise to keep calling these meetings, especially with everything that's happening?" "The reason I called you here, Cassandra." A voice I recognized anywhere answered her. It was Dr. Jenkins, and my blood ran cold, and I started to panic. I can't get caught. Not now. And to steady myself, I shoved my hands into the pockets of my sweatpants. There was something hard in them. I pulled it out, and it was a tape recorder I'd always kept on me. Without even thinking, I turned it on. "It's because your daughter is fucking missing." "I beg your pardon, Jay. Language." She sounded drunk. My blood curdled at the sound. "She's at home. Where else?" Dr. Jenkins interrupted her. "Not that daughter." I heard exasperation in his voice. "Amy. Where the hell did Amy go?" I was feeling lightheaded. Holy fuck, they were looking for me. And there was a crack of light where the supply closet connected to Dr. Jenkins' office, and I could see through it and see my mother, standing in her powder blue skirt suit, looking down at Dr. Jenkins, who was sitting behind his mahogany desk. My mother's tone was loud and dismissive. "How should I know? She's probably back at school." "You don't know? Dr. Jenkins put his fist down onto the desk. "You don't know? She's not at school, nor at her apartment. We checked this morning, and she's not at your house either. So, I ask again, where is she?" "We care." And I suddenly realized my mother and Dr. Jenkins weren't alone in his office. There was a group of adults sitting in there with them, including Arjan's parents, Arjav and Raji. His mother, Raji, sat like she'd been crying. My heart twisted. I love Arjan's parents. They ran a chain of candy shops in Grovefield, and I used to love getting candy from them as a kid. Even now as an adult, it was such an instant hit of euphoric happiness every time I visited. I was happy they were still open, considering that I'd never actually seen anyone buy anything there. "Because apparently there's been a shooting on Connor Street in Arjun." "Your son was involved in that?" My mother suddenly sounded shocked. "Is he okay? But the church said that the man in white, Arjun's fine." Arjav, his dad, spoke up. I couldn't see them, not in the position I was sitting in, but his voice sounded sharp, electric. "He's alive, or for now, but apparently he was shot. He's at this hospital in room 182. I was flabbergasted. His parents know he was shot, and didn't know why. Why haven't they done anything? My brain was spinning in circles, and suddenly I was having a hard time breathing. "But before we go to see him, we need to know what they know. Cassandra." Jay spoke up again. He sounded closer to me. He must have been leaning back in his chair. "This is starting to unravel, and at the center of it are your daughters." "My daughters?" Her voice positively dripped acid. Her tone went scary low and quiet. "They're such a tiny part of this. How dare you insinuate that Amy, the drunken, almost dropout, or that my Paula would—" "Even the tiniest thread," Arjav suddenly whispered, "can pull apart the greatest tapestry." His voice was so low that I could barely hear him. "And you, in your arrogance and blind faith, brought that loose end home." Anger was thickening in his voice. "You brought that thing home and exposed Amy." Smack! Arjav was cut off, and I suddenly heard my mother slap him hard across the face. "How dare you!" she kept shrieking as I heard a pandemonium in his office. Chairs scuffed hard against the linoleum. Stacks of binders were shoved to the floor. A desk lamp was overturned. "How dare you call her that?" "Calm down." Dr. Jenkins sprang to his feet and forced them apart. "Cassandra, stop! Calm down!" And I spotted my mother through the crack of the door. Her blue suit was disheveled, and her shiny exterior shell was beginning to crack. Dr. Jenkins turned the chair upright and gently pushed her to sit. "We just need to know, has Paula said anything to you? To Amy? To your husband? Specifically, has she said anything to you about the mountain?" My mother was sitting perfectly still, her posture as stiff and unforgiving as that chair. Her hands twisted the strap of her powder blue handbag, like she was twisting off the top of a Diet Coke bottle. "No, she hasn't said anything." Her handbag was clinking gently. "In fact," her voice went thick with emotion, "she hasn't said anything at all. She also doesn't eat. She doesn't do anything. She's a shell." She was crying harder now, with her elbows on her knees and her hands cradling her head. "After all these years, I still don't understand. She wasn't supposed to be taken. I was promised." And she looked at Dr. Jenkins with red-rimmed eyes. "I did everything right. I love the church. And this is how I'm repaid?" "Jesus, Cassandra, this same old shit." Suddenly, another voice, a man, standing to the right of the Dr. Jenkins' desk. I couldn't see him, but I'd recognize that voice too. It was Louise and Daphne's father, Roger Tiths. "You aren't the only one who's missing a child." Their father was quiet, but an imposing man. Roger Tiths owned a series of incredibly successful laundromats. He moved to Grovefield right after Daphne was born, and right after he'd lost their mother to a horrific car accident. The driver had walked, not only from his destroyed vehicle, but from the following case trial as well, and Roger had lost everything. He'd moved to Grosefield right after, with his 2 young daughters, a newborn and a 9-year-old, and he'd always said that it was his only chance to recover what was lost. My mother sniffled. She was a pitiful sight. "But you have your business at least." "Yes, but Daphne wasn't part of the deal." He turned to Dr. Jenkins. "Neither was Paula. We have only 3 weeks until..." He paused. "But it feels different this time. Stronger." He paused again. He sounded different. It took me a moment to realize why. He sounded scared. "It feels, unbalanced," he murmured. "Do you think the head knows, Jay?" "Jesus, how can you say that?" Dr. Jenkins retorted loudly. "God, no. If the head finds out, all of our kids, Amy, Arjun, Jack, Louise, they're all dead. We're dead. Anybody connected to this?" Jesus, I thought to myself, horrified. What is going on? What are our parents involved in? "I want out," my mother sniffed loudly. "I want to be done." The room was silent. Nobody said anything, except for my mother's loud sniffs. "You can't get out, Cassie. You know that," Dr. Jenkins finally said softly. "We all went to the mountain for a reason." He looked tired, haggard, and he was wearing a white lab coat over black wrinkled scrubs. As he bent down to pick up the binders that had been knocked to the floor, I noticed something. They were thick, black leather bracelets encircling his wrists like handcuffs. They were strapped tight to his skin, practically cutting the circulation off, and it looked like his wrists were bleeding. No, that's not blood, I suddenly realized. Thin, black vines extended from the bracelets and were burrowing themselves into his skin. I recoiled. And now we had to deal with the consequences. Suddenly, my legs gave out. I tried to stop myself, but I fell hard, accidentally knocking over a stack of buckets. I heard someone cry out in Dr. Jenkins' office, but I didn't wait to see who it was. I turned off the tape recorder and sprinted out into the hallway. Arjun was just waking up by the time I made it back. Jack was standing over him, helping him to sit up. The hospital computer was beeping frantically, and in one furious motion, I bent down and unplugged it, and it went silent. "Amy, what the fuck?" Jack said. I gripped his arm hard. "We need to leave, now." I couldn't think straight. All I could see were those black bracelets burrowing into Jack's dad's arms. And I turned to Arjun. "Can you walk?" "Amy?" Arjun was loopy. I could tell, but surprisingly coherent. He was struggling to sit up, but the drug's effect was very slowly wearing off. Hey, Amy." He grabbed my hand. "Hey, you didn't leave me back there. Thank you." "Oh, Arjun." I cupped his hand and brought it to my cheek. For a brief second, I forgot about Dr. Jenkins. I forgot about the bracelets. I forgot about my mum racing down the hallway to find me. "Don't even say that." Intense relief washed over me. He was alive. "Of course I didn't leave you. You had the car keys." Arjun chuckled, sitting up, but his expression quickly turned sour. "Wait, are we in a hospital?" Jack leaned over to help him up. "Well, Amy felt like, because of the seriousness of your leg, you needed more serious help." "Fuck," Arjun said, cutting him off. I mean, thank you, but I don't think you realize that..." "What? That all our parents are involved in this? Including Jack's dad? Dr. J. Jenkins?" I finished the sentence for him. I handed him his blue robe from earlier and a grey tracksuit that Jack had brought. "Wait, my dad is involved in what?" Jack asked, shocked. "I overheard them. He's here. All our parents are here. Now, in this hospital." And I was helping Arjun up. "And they know." "Know about what?" "About this." I gestured wildly. "About me ditching my parents' house, about Arjun getting shot, about Paula coming back as this fucked up demonic shell." I could feel my mother's words echoing inside me. "We need a plan." "Wait, hold up." Jack held up his hands. "What does my dad have to do with that?" He pointed to my phone. And with Paula coming back." "Because, for starters, he was the first fucking person to see her, besides that ranger and my parents." He was with her every second she spent at this godforsaken hospital. I was at the end of my rope. I could practically feel my mother racing down the hall to catch me. We needed to leave, and now. And he didn't say anything to you. Don't you find that a little bit suspicious? But Jack was shaking his head. There's gotta be some sort of explanation. We need to leave. I'll explain on the way. I picked up Arjun's bag and helped him up. Everything else we had was in the Pontiac, along with Milo and Monroe, who were waiting for us. Wait, shit. I paused in the doorway. Where should we go? My apartment's out. Jack's dad was there this morning, I said, panicking. Arjun's home is out. My parents' house has this fucking thing crawling around and... But Jack interrupted me. The cabin. You could hide out there for as long as you need. Duh, the cabin. I didn't even think of that. That was the perfect place. You sure? But he was nodding. The elevators dinged and we descended to the ground floor. We're almost out. The parking lot was right through the entrance doors. I could practically see the Pontiac from where we were, in the back corner where I'd haphazardly parked it this morning. Jesus, the Pontiac looked bad. Well, there was glass everywhere, all over the passenger seat, and the entire back seat was coated in blood. Jack took off his jacket and laid it down before helping Arjun into the back seat. Monroe and Milo went crazy, whining and licking him. When I paused, my hand resting on the door handle. Look, Stop. Gently grabbing my arm, he turned me around to face him. But I couldn't stop. The words kept pouring out. Look, I just wanted to say thank you. Amy, stop. He brushed a curl from where it had fallen over my eye. I'm coming too. My heart thudded. You what? He nodded. After my shift, he started walking backwards towards his car, an old beat-up white Subaru. After all, I gotta finish fixing you up. He called out. You still remember where the cabin is, right? Oh, I remember. I was on Main Street, heading out of town. Arjun had passed out as the adrenaline from this morning wore off, and the events from this morning knocked him out. I stopped briefly for snacks and water. We were about to drive 8 hours, and I was still starving. There was a lot of traffic, and I was stopped, waiting to pull out at the gas station. And that's when I saw it. There was an accident up ahead. It looked horrific. A car had flipped across the meridian and struck a small Honda Civic. Accidents always got bad during tourist season down here. Sometimes it was road rage, sometimes drunk driving, sometimes just carelessness. And out of the small, crushed Honda Civic, it looked like only one person had survived. A woman, weeping, was sitting by the side of the road, watching as the ambulance was being loaded up with bodies of her companions. But as the ambulance pulled away, I suddenly realized something. She wasn't alone. Because standing behind her was the man in white. When I was 6 years old, my sister disappeared during a hike on a family camping trip in Yosemite. Part 4. Let's get straight into that. Well, you're not supposed to travel these roads at night. They say it's because they're too narrow and too wild, and that it'd be easy to pop a tire, and that these roads are so isolated that it takes hours for anyone to find you. Travel during the day, they say. Stick to the paved roads around these wild woods, and whatever you do, avoid any shortcuts that cut straight through. Heed this warning and heed this rhyme, especially if you were to find yourself at the sweet Hollow Pass. Look, I was tired. I hadn't eaten in almost 24 hours. Arjun had fallen asleep hours ago, after valiantly trying to fight the medication the hospital had injected him with. I didn't even have him to distract me, as my eyelids were growing heavier by the second. I was desperate, and the Sweet Hollow Pass was a shortcut that cut through the tail end of the Six Rivers National Forest. Instead of taking Highway 93 all the way around, the pass cut straight through, shaving almost 3 hours off the trip. But I could feel my eyelids drooping heavier by the second, and so I needed to do something, anything. And swallowing hard, I took the hard right of a Highway 93 and onto Sweet Hollow Pass. Well, they say somebody died out here. Another tourist told me that during the summer after our freshman year. Jack, Louise and I had been working in the gift shops around the Six Rivers when we first heard about it. Almost 10 years ago, a woman around 30 years old and traveling by herself tried to take the shortcut through Sweet Hollow Pass. It had been a particularly rainy summer after the very hard and dry winter, and too much rain in too short a time had led to horrific and cataclysmic mudslides. Apparently, she'd been caught in a freak one, according to the police, and after another 6 hours of searching, they managed to find her car, and they never did find the body. They say that on misty, foggy nights, like the night that she disappeared, if you're traveling on Sweet Hollow Pass, that Sally Gray will try to find you instead. Don't think about that, I muttered to myself. Don't fucking think about that. And I checked the GPS. It was a miracle as to had service out here. 15 miles. It blinked in fluorescent blue light. 20 minutes, I whispered. It was so dark outside, the trees pressed close, the canopy blocking out any hint of moonlight from above, and the windshield was fogging up. I cursed quietly. It was impossible to see outside. I curled my sweatshirt over my fist and reached up, using it to wipe away the condensation. And suddenly, I could see through a tiny sliver. Shit! I cried and turned the steering wheel hard, heart pounding. I felt the passenger tire skim the edge of the enormous pothole. The car dipped hard, the back tire spinning out but carefully. I felt us move past. Chest tight, I let out a sigh of relief. But it didn't last long. Fuck! I yelled as I hit the brakes again. The car swerved, rear tire spinning again in the mud, but it brought us to a complete stop. And breathing hard, I glanced over at Arjun. He was still out cold. Panic setting in, and the edges of my vision threatening to go white, I peered through that tiny sliver in my windshield. The air left my lungs. Arjun, I whispered, reaching over, and I shook him, my eyes still staring straight ahead. Arjun, wake up! Nothing. He was out cold. My mouth went dry. There was a girl standing in the road. She was streaked with mud from head to toe, like she crawled from a shallow grave. Her chin was tucked into her chest, and all I could see was a head of thick, curly brown hair. And she was swaying uneasily in the car's headlights, like she was drugged. I squinted. It looked like she was wearing something black around her wrists. Bracelets? Rope? Broken handcuffs, maybe? I really couldn't see through the fogged-up windshield. And slowly, carefully, I rolled the window down. Miss? I called out quietly. Are you lost? My voice fell flat against the silent forest. I hadn't realized how quiet it had gotten. The girl visibly startled at the sound of my voice, her body twisted, like she didn't have any control over it. One green eye peeked out at me from underneath the mop of curly brown hair, and then another. She was grinning, horrifically. Her mouth was stretched horribly, the lips literally going from ear to ear. Yellowed, rotten teeth peeked through, and that's when I realized something. I felt all the air leave my lungs. Holy shit! I cried, not caring if I finally woke Arjun up. I can't believe it. She looks like me. Amy! Amy! Huh? I suddenly snapped back to Arjun, hitting my shoulder hard. What's going on? You tell me. Arjun said uneasily. He was sitting, leaning over me. I had my shoulder in a death grip. You were zoned out and staring straight ahead. I just woke up to find us sitting in the middle of the freaking Sweet Hollow Pass. The girl in the road. I whipped around, my heart beating furiously, my eyes searching desperately. But there was no sign of her. I could feel the engine humming underneath my shaking hands. The girl. Did you see her? See who? Arjun said quietly, his eyes never leaving me. The girl. She looked like... I whipped around again, searching valiantly around the car. Nothing. No trace of her. Looked like me. She looked like... you? Arjun said cautiously. "Amy," he said quietly, "are you seeing things?" I swallowed uneasily. Had I fallen asleep without realizing it, while driving? But it felt so real. Cautiously, I settled back into my seat, heart pounding. I tried to put a lid on the wild panic I'd felt in my chest. Carefully keeping my expression neutral, I put the car back into drive. "You're right," I said quietly. "It's probably nothing." It wasn't until we left the forest and the tires finally hit asphalt did I finally take a breath. We were almost there. Jack's cabin sat almost directly in the center between the town of Willow Creek and the Hooper Indian Reservation, and alongside the very edge of the Six Rivers National Forest. We were heading to the small town of Burnt Towers. Burnt Towers was a tiny, unincorporated town of only 300 individuals. However, the proximity to Six Rivers and the breathtaking rolling hills of green in the summer and the changing leaves in the fall made it an extremely popular tourist spot. Now, legend has it that Burnt Towers got its name from a pair of enormous structures that suddenly appeared at the entrance of town almost 200 years ago. Seemingly, overnight, these 40 feet tall monstrosities were erected without any clue as to who actually built them. And there they stood until one night, at 3 o'clock in the morning. The locals woke up to them entirely engulfed in flames. The fire was massive, hot, and raging out of control, but there was nothing anyone could do. The fire service from the nearby town of Cedar Flats had been called, but by the time they had gotten there, it was too late. The towers had completely burnt down. Hence the name, Burnt Towers. Burnt Towers had one main road in town. There was a gas station, a bank, a grocery store, a hardware store, several stores filled with outdoor and hiking type gear, and several restaurants. There were a few speakeasies and dive bars too, but they were located a little further down. And there were 5 main offshoots from the downtown area, mainly neighborhoods, which is where all the locals lived, and hotels. The park that we used to play at was at the back there too. Jack's cabin was located off one of those main offshoots. It was located a few miles outside of town and at the very top of a large hill. It was just beautiful, as I remembered. A large, wild Victorian-style cabin, with flowers climbing the large columns that stood on either side of the front door. The flowers climbed the side of the house and spilled out onto the large, wrap-around porch. This place had been built with love. Jack's dad had built it for Jack's mum after she had been diagnosed with a red kidney disorder almost 30 years ago. Good luck charm, he called it. It must have worked because after moving to Growfield, Jack's mum had managed to outlast the diagnosis for almost 30 years. A living medical miracle, they called her, until she passed away almost 14 years ago. I turned my phone over, the white light brightening in the dim back patio. The screen clicked on. Nothing. Of course, I muttered as my heart sank. Jack hadn't texted me. I shouldn't be surprised. Despite what he'd said to me almost 10 hours ago in the parking lot of the Tulum hospital, I doubt he was actually still considering meeting us. But there was too much going on for him to just drop everything. He had work and he had school. He had his girlfriend. And I shook my head. But I couldn't help but feel the echoes of his words. I could see him in my mind's eye, and my cheek still burned from where he'd touched it. Of course, I'm meeting you, Amy, he'd said to me in that parking lot. He'd promised me. Somebody has to finish fixing you up. I shook my head again, hard. Fuck. Couldn't afford to think like that now, and I took a sip of tea to clear my head. It clicked gently on the patio table, next to the binders from Argent's basement. Or they were the ones I'd snatched desperately before we were forced to make a break for it, and they were filled with maps, missing person reports dating back to almost 60 years ago. And pages of tightly packed, handwritten notes. I didn't understand it, and frankly, it was making my head hurt. I shook my head again. I needed Argent to wake up and explain. And with a sigh, I sat back in my seat, thinking about everything that had transpired in the last 2 days. 3 weeks, I murmured quietly to myself. What's happening in 3 weeks? Monroe was sitting outside with me, and she was tilting her head back and forth as if she was listening to me. I looked down at her. I don't suppose you know what Louise's dad meant when he said that. It's happening in 3 weeks. Monroe cocked her head and let out a low woof, and I laughed. I don't know either, girl. I rubbed my temples hard, feeling the bones of my knuckles grind against my skull. Of course, except for one thing. Monroe was still watching me, her eyes intently focused on mine. The anniversary of Paula's disappearance, and I sighed again. And at the rate everything's going, I'm sure something fucking horrible is going to happen. I reached over for my teacup, accidentally swatting a firefly that had landed on it. Oh, sorry, little guy, I whispered as I pulled my hand away. I flew away, dipping and weaving like a drunk man leaving a bar. I looked up, and the whole backyard was filled with them. The fireflies looked like flickering stars, coming down for a brief visit. It was beautiful. With how they clustered around the tops of the trees and the bushes and grass, it looked like the entire backyard was on fire. Ugh. I rubbed my temples again. My head was killing me. But this headache had started not long after the little drive through Sweet Hollow Pass. I used to get these horrible, mind-splitting headaches as a kid. The kind where it felt like something fat and horrible had taken a shit on your brain. I had also left behind something that was now slowly hatching inside your skull. For months, my mum had been convinced it was just migraines. Migraines? Doctor's question, perplexed. But what 4-year-old gets migraines? Of course, it probably didn't help that I was introduced to Xanax not long after this. I dug my fingernails into my thigh, forcing the fog to part of my head to clear. I thought to myself, it's been almost 6 years since I got on one. This is probably just stress-related. I tilted the teacup back, chugging the rest of it. I go buy some Advil in the morning. Come on, Monroe. I tapped my thigh, motioning to her. I headed inside, locking the patio door behind me. And by the time I woke up, my headache had gotten worse. Instead of just the throbbing headache from last night, it now felt like my brain was trying to dismember itself, piece by piece, and squeeze the brain tissue through both ear canals. I sat up, clutching my head. Fuck! I moaned. My feet touched the bare hardwood floors, and I shivered. I was freezing. I heaved myself up and stumbled around, searching in vain for the keys, and in my haste, I accidentally smacked into Monroe, who was laying at the foot of the bed. She let out a loud woof, throwing me an incredibly judgmental look. I laughed, with the same look she had used to give me when in high school I'd sneak in through the oversized doggy door to sleep at Argent's, because I was high as a kite and avoided my dad. But I knew what would change her mind. You want to go for a ride? Now the bell dinged as I walked into Miss Key's general store. Burn Towers was empty this morning. Apparently 7 in the morning was still too early for people, I guess. The scent of pine needles, deck stain and leather oil pulled me in like a hug, and I took a deep sniff and let it out. Everything was exactly the same. The lines of fishing poles stacked against the far wall, the cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling and filled with packets of ramen, cereal and protein bars that always crumbled into dust every time you bit into them. This is where we used to get our gear for the long camping trips that were the hallmark of our summers in Burnt Towers. I bet if I looked, I could find the old aluminium flask that Jack and I had hidden inside one of the popcorn ceiling tiles when I worked here during the summer before our sophomore year. That flask of Jameson kept me blessedly numb from the chaos that was always coming with the crazy summer tourist months. Tap, tap, tap. Suddenly I heard the familiar sound of spurs on the hardwood floor. Is that Miss Amy I see lurking around my store again? I felt myself light up into a smile. Miss Keys, I cried. She was in the back of the store, smoking a cigarette behind the cash registers. A Marlboro Light. I recognized that plume of smoke anywhere. She used to go through a pack a day. Despite all the efforts from local authorities, you just couldn't keep me away. I laughed. She tapped the cigarette in her trademark ceramic cowboy hat ashtray, ash in it. She grumbled. I can remember a time or two when the cops came calling to my door. She cracked a grin. And you ain't even my baby. What'll it be today, sweetheart? As she slapped both hands on a thick, carved desk. Look, she eagerly pointed. We got some new items I think you'd be interested in. She held up a silver and red latest edition S14 German Swiss Army knife. Brand new and fresh off the boat. No, I begged her off, holding up my hands. Not today, just these. And on the counter I had set a jumbo-sized bottle of Advil and a bag of Purina dog food. Advil, huh? She rested one sharp eye on me. Are you getting headaches again? Her brow furrowed as her dark grey eyebrows pulled together, and she looked concerned. Her grey hair, which I could remember used to be the same shade as her smoky, dark brown eyes, was pulled back into a severe bun. Her tanned olive skin contrasted sharply against the thick white cable knit sweater she had on. I thought those had gone away. I winced again. The headache was beginning to pick up speed like a storm gathering in the horizon. I cracked open a bottle and quickly downed a couple, hoping that this would stave it off. But as the pill slid down my throat, I suddenly felt a strong wave of dizziness. I swallowed hard as everything threatened to come back up. I'm sorry, is there somewhere I can sit down? Sure, hon. Miss Key's spurs clinked as she pulled me around and into the back office. I felt her hands on my shoulders as she half pushed and I half fell into an uncomfortable, straight-back chair. I tried to swallow, wincing painfully as my throat felt dry and scratchy. Miss Keys noticed. Sit tight, she cried. Let me get you some water too. Fuck, my head was throbbing. Pressing the palms of my hands against my temples, I sighed and looked around. Literally nothing had changed since the last time I was here. A large shelving unit, filling almost the entire back wall, was filled with cardboard boxes of inventory. Fishing gear, clothing items, hats, etc. Next to the shelving unit was a small propped-up card table that we considered our break room, considering that it was just a mini fridge and a microwave on a fold-out table. Jack always used to joke that we were one smelly fish sandwich away from a total disaster. But wait, I paused. This was new. I got up and walked over for a better look. I felt dizzy as real blood rushed to my head. Have you seen me? Screamed down at me from 100 different posters. Missing. Hundreds of faces jumped out at me. Men, women, children. It all looked like every age and race was up on that board. Miss Keys had hung a giant orange corkboard that was filled with missing posters. And stunned and momentarily forgetting the roaring headache, I reached up to trace the face of a missing child. Betty Ingram, I read, my voice catching my throat. 10 years old, missing in Yosemite National Park. I read another one. Patricia Rose, age 45 years old, last seen in Six Rivers National Park. My voice cracked. Tom Parker, 21 years old, reported missing after friends woke up to find him gone from their campsite in Tahoe National Forest. And I checked the dates, and a shiver ran through me. These were all dated from the past 10 years. Beatrice Montclair, age 31, reported missing after she didn't return from a hike in, and I paused, in Yosemite National Park, on the Glacier Point Trail. I felt my brain churning. I stared at her photo. What happened to you? I whispered. Her dark eyes stared back at me, saying nothing. The longer I stared at her, the worse my headache was getting. I felt tears rise up in the back of my throat as I suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to cry. Her picture blurred as they clouded my vision. What the fuck was happening out in Yosemite National Park? Fuck! I cupped my ears. The pressure in my head had gotten so bad that my ears were starting to ring. Oh, it sounded shrill, high-pitched, like tuning into a TV channel where someone was being brutally murdered. I grimaced, glancing back at Beatrice's picture. Is this what you sounded like right before you disappeared? And then, as if in response to my question, her picture suddenly moved. I gasped. No! I muttered frantically, screwing my eyes shut. My brain felt like it was on fire. The pressure in my ears was becoming unbearable. Most of all, I just couldn't believe that this was happening again. It's been years since... Shit! No, stop! I wouldn't let myself think about it. I backed away from the wall, feeling behind me for the chair. My knee hit the corner of the filing cabinet hard, but I didn't dare open my eyes. My heart was pounding furiously. Where was my bag? Amy? My eyes flew open. Miss Keys was standing in the doorway, Is everything all right? She asked, looking uneasy. I must have looked silly, walking backwards with my eyes shut like that. She had a bottle of water in one hand and a hot water bottle in the other. I'm fine, I chirped, forcing a smile on my face. Sorry about that. I'm feeling a lot better. I headed out towards the front door, my heart pounding. I'll call you once I'm settled in. And I could hear her calling out to me as I stumbled towards the front door, but I couldn't stop. I could feel Beatrice's eyes watching me as I walked out. In a daze, I burst onto the busy sidewalk. Burnt Towers was bustling now. The shops were open. The diner I'd party in front of was packed with people who were racing around getting ready to hit the trails early. In the morning light, flush against the normalcy of people going to breakfast with their families, the Pontiac looked bad. I winced, seeing heads turn as I opened the driver's side door. I knew that they were looking at the busted passenger window and the twisted chunks of metal and glass. I knew I should care, but I didn't. I couldn't care. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. My stomach roiled and flipped as a kaleidoscope of emotions cycled through my brain. The headache had gotten worse. Those 2 Advil I'd taken in Miss Key's shop be damned, and the pain ebbed and flowed with the pulse of my blood. I fought back tears as I couldn't believe this was happening again. No, I whispered. Stop, don't cry. I shut my eyes tightly and gripped the steering wheel. You're gonna make it worse. But I could feel my knuckles starting to turn white. It didn't help that every time I closed my eyes, every time I blinked, I could see Beatrice's face. I could still see what it looked like the second it started to move. Fuck! Stop! Stop! Okay, stop! I reached over to grab Monroe. Dude, girl, stop barking! Monroe was sitting in the passenger seat and she was absolutely losing her mind. Girl, this isn't helping. People were sitting next to us at the patio tables of Lucky Dave's local spot, but I could feel the heat of their stares from the entire restaurant. I grabbed her collar in an attempt to calm her down. Girl, what the fuck are you even barking at? My voice trailed off. My blood went cold when I saw where she was looking. There was something standing behind the dumpsters at the end of the street. I leaned forward, my eyes straining, and for a minute there was nothing. Just a quiet alleyway behind the local drugstore. And there, slowly, as I watched, something peeked out over the lid of the dumpsters. And then suddenly it ducked back down, like it was trying to hide. Monroe started growling again. The back of my neck started tingling. A cold sweat suddenly broke out and I felt the ground suddenly drop out from underneath me. I recognized that hair anywhere. This was the same thing I'd seen back in Sweet Hollow Pass. The thing that looked like me. I smashed my eyes shut, grinding the hill of my hands into my eyes. Fuck! The building pressure on my head threatened to pop my eyes like grapes. Please be gone! Please be gone! Please be gone! I sobbed. Then I stopped, breathing in a shuddering, stealing sense of resolve. I gingerly opened them back up. Nothing. My mind, it felt splintered, chaotic, and like all the pieces were slowly falling apart. I felt trapped, cornered, like how a field mouse must feel when being stalked by a hawk. I took another big shuddering breath in. I looked over at Monroe, and she was looking at me with all her fur standing up on her back. Reaching out, I put my hand on her soft, jet black head, and she was shaking. Let's get out of here, I whispered. The drive home felt agonizingly long. Didn't help that my head was pounding. My phone was practically ringing non-stop. Whoever this was, they'd called me like 10 times in the past 5 minutes. Without looking, I turned off the ringer and tossed it into the footwell at the passenger seat. It wasn't 5 minutes later when I finally pulled into the winding driveway that led past a pair of massive Douglas firs and up to Jack's cabin. And to my surprise, Arjun was waiting for me outside. He'd barely waited for me to park before he threw open my door. Amy, I've been calling you, he said with one balled up fist on his hip. Literally like 20 times. You can't just not pick up. There's something we need to... Oh, that was you? I mumbled, shoving him aside. The bag from Miss Key swung wide and hit me hard. the Advil digging into my hip bone. I texted and told you I was going into town. Yeah, that was me. He sounded mad. Arjun tried to follow me, but the bulky cast on his leg slowed him down. But that's not what we need to talk about. Amy, listen. Can this wait until after a nap? I could feel my body shutting down. The events from this morning were catching up to me, and I needed at least 10 more Advil in me. I walked up to the front door, with Monroe bouncing up the steps next to me. Wait, Amy! I could hear Arjun crying out right behind me. Wait! There's something I need to tell you. I swung open the front door to find a mountain of suitcases in the foyer. My heart stopped. Oh, I said quietly. They're here. Arjun huffed. He'd finally caught up to me. The red bathrobe he was wearing flapped as he heaved himself up the steps. They got in about an hour ago. I could feel the wheels turning in my head. Arjun, I said slowly. Who's they? And suddenly, I heard a voice that I never thought I'd hear again. A voice that I knew belonged to my best friend in the entire world. Until 3 years ago, when she threatened to shoot me if I didn't leave her house and never come back. And rightfully so. Oh, hell no, she cried. You gotta be fucking kidding me. I winced. Hi, Louise. What is she doing here? Louise growled. Every syntax in her voice positively dripped with venom. They were all in the living room. Patrice, Mikey, Jack. The old gang was all here. Jack had brought everybody. I was stunned. I watched as she turned to Jack. You told me she wasn't going to be here. I looked at Arjun, and his face looked ashen, and his eyes were wildly between me and Louise. I took a deep breath. I think now is a good time to take a nap. Wow. Sadly, another one. Wow. What a fantastic story this is turning out to be. I can't wait for the update or the finale. Of course, a huge thank you to the incredible author, AgonyBlue, from over on Reddit, No Sleep. Big thank you, Agony, for allowing me to narrate the story on the show. I really hope you enjoy my rendition, and I look forward to any updates in the future. Well, guys and girls as ever, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. Well, it really does help build the channel and the community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. If you're an aspiring writer or would just like to have a crack at things like myself, then please do get in touch with me at the contact email, which is as on screen. Contact thedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope everyone's had a fantastic week at work or school, or perhaps you're a long distance driver. Whatever it is that you do, I hope you're enjoying it and giving it your all. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.